I'm Jessica, 32, and until last month, I was the senior cryptography officer at CipherTech, where I spent 8 years building and protecting our entire security infrastructure. My specialty was HSM management, hardware security modules that safeguard the most critical keys in any security system. I never imagined I'd be escorted from the building I helped secure, or that within hours of my departure those same systems would collapse. Before I tell you how my career imploded, in just 27 minutes, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by those you trusted. The road to becoming a cryptography specialist wasn't something I had mapped out in high school. Back then, I was just a math nerd with a knack for solving puzzles that made my classmates groan. But during my senior year, everything changed when my parents' identities were stolen. I watched helplessly as they spent months trying to reclaim their financial lives, arguing with credit agencies and banks who treated them like criminals. That experience lit a fire in me. Security wasn't just about algorithms anymore, it was personal. I threw myself into studying computer science and mathematics at MIT, focusing specifically on applied cryptography. My professors noticed my intensity, how I'd stay after class, asking questions about encryption protocols that went far beyond the syllabus. By my junior year, I was helping doctoral candidates test security vulnerabilities in banking systems. That's where I discovered my fascination with hardware security modules, HSMIS. For those unfamiliar with HSMs, they're specialized tamper-resistant devices that generate, store, and protect cryptographic keys. Think of them as ultra-secure vaults for the digital keys that unlock everything in a security system. If someone compromises an HSM, they potentially have access to an entire organization's crown jewels. In security, we call this the root of trust, the foundation upon which all other security measures depend. After graduation, I landed my dream job at CipherTech. They weren't the biggest name in cybersecurity, but they had a stellar reputation for integrity and technical excellence. The company provided encryption services to financial institutions and government agencies, clients who couldn't afford security breaches. When I joined, CipherTech had about 70 employees and operated out of a converted warehouse with terrible coffee but brilliant minds. Franklin Davis, the chief technology officer and company co-founder, became my mentor. A tall, lanky man with prematurely gray hair and perpetually smudged glasses, Franklin had an almost religious reverence for proper security protocols. Shortcuts in cryptography are like cracks in a dam, he'd say. They might look insignificant until the whole thing collapses. He took me under his wing, impressed by my thesis on multi-factor authentication for HSM access. Within my first year, I had established myself as the go-to person for HSM configuration and management. I built a small team including Rachel Kim, a brilliant programmer who shared my obsession with detail. Rachel had this uncanny ability to spot potential vulnerabilities in code that everyone else missed. We'd often stay late meticulously testing security protocols and documenting everything in triplicate. Some colleagues joked that we were paranoid, but in security, paranoia is a professional asset. Over the next 7 years, CipherTech grew from a promising startup into a respected industry player. Our client list expanded to include 3 of the largest banks in the country and various federal agencies I wasn't allowed to name at dinner parties. Our staff tripled, we moved into a gleaming office tower in the financial district, and the coffee improved marginally. I was promoted to senior cryptography officer, managing a team of 8 security specialists. The turning point came when Vortex Ventures, a venture capital firm known for aggressive growth strategies, invested $50 million in CipherTech. Suddenly, our comfortable security-first culture faced pressure to move faster and disrupt the market. The investors installed Margaret Wilson as our new CEO, replacing one of the founders who'd been with the company since day one. Margaret was sleek-polished and laser-focused on market share. She wore designer suits, spoke in business school jargon, and had no background in cybersecurity. In our first one-on-one meeting, she glanced at her watch 4 times in 20 minutes and asked if we could streamline our security review process to accelerate product deployment. Shortly after Margaret's arrival, Timothy Barnes joined as head of product development. Timothy had come from a consumer app company and approached security as if it were a feature that could be added or modified at will. "We need to be nimble," became his mantra, especially when my team raised concerns about rushing new products to market. Then there was Samuel Peterson from Human Resources, a thin-lipped man who viewed security protocols as bureaucratic obstacles. Every time we required background checks for new developers or restricted access to sensitive systems, Samuel would sigh dramatically and mutter about operational efficiency. The warning signs accumulated gradually. First, our weekly security review meetings were shortened from 2 hours to 30 minutes. Then the penetration testing schedule, which I had carefully designed to probe our systems for weaknesses, was reduced from monthly to quarterly because it was disruptive to development. I started noticing security exceptions being granted more frequently for new features. When I questioned these decisions, Timothy would respond with phrases like calculated risk or competitive necessity. Franklin, once my staunch ally, began attending fewer security meetings, delegating them to junior staff who lacked the authority to push back against Timothy's momentum. CipherTech's flagship new initiative was a cloud-based encryption service for healthcare providers designed to secure patient data while making it accessible across different hospital systems. The project, codenamed Esculapius, had an aggressive 6-month development timeline that made my stomach churn. Proper security architecture alone should take at least that long. 3 months into the project, while reviewing access logs as part of my regular security audit, I discovered a serious vulnerability in the HSM access protocols for Esculapius. The development team had implemented a workaround that essentially created a backdoor into our key management system. It wasn't immediately exploitable, but it violated fundamental security principles and could potentially compromise our entire infrastructure. I spent the weekend documenting the vulnerability, creating diagrams, showing exactly how it could be exploited, and developing 3 different solutions with varying implementation timelines. I prepared a comprehensive presentation for the executive meeting scheduled for Monday morning, confident that once they understood the risks, they would authorize my team to address the issue immediately. I remember feeling nervous but excited as I prepared to present my findings. This was exactly why my role existed, to catch these problems before they became catastrophes. I believed the executive team would appreciate the thorough analysis and clear solutions I had prepared. I couldn't have been more wrong. The executive meeting room on the 20th floor had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I arrived 15 minutes early to set up my presentation and review my notes. Franklin nodded hello as he entered, followed by Margaret, Timothy, and several other executives. I had prepared 20 slides detailing the vulnerability, its potential impact, and my recommended solutions. Good morning, everyone. I began once the meeting started. I've discovered a critical security vulnerability in the Esculapius project that requires immediate attention. I clicked to my second slide showing the HSM access protocol diagram with the vulnerability highlighted in red. Before I could continue, Margaret raised her hand. Jessica, how long will this presentation take? About 15 minutes for the presentation, and then we should discuss implementation options, so maybe 30 minutes total. Margaret exchanged glances with Timothy. We have a packed agenda today. Can you give us the abbreviated version in 2 minutes? Startled, I attempted to condense hours of analysis into a few sentences. Essentially, the current HSM access implementation creates a potential backdoor into our key management system. This could compromise our root of trust and how would that affect our release timeline? Timothy interrupted. Well, that depends on which solution we implement. I've outlined 3 options. Margaret cut me off again. Jessica, we appreciate your diligence, but this level of caution will put us months behind competitor releases. Is this an actual breach or a theoretical concern? It's a serious architectural flaw, I explained, feeling my face flush. It hasn't been exploited yet, but then it's a potential issue we can address in version 2, Margaret concluded. Timothy, make sure Jessica's concerns are logged for the next development cycle. I looked at Franklin, expecting him to back me up. He had always insisted that security fundamentals were non-negotiable, but he simply adjusted his glasses and remained silent. This isn't a feature that can wait, I persisted. It's a fundamental security flaw in the architecture. Margaret's smile tightened. Jessica, we need to find a balance between perfect security and market reality. Please work with Timothy to find a faster solution that doesn't delay our release. Now let's move on to the marketing update. Just like that, my carefully prepared presentation was dismissed. I sat through the rest of the meeting in a daze, barely hearing the marketing team's discussion of launch events and press releases. After the meeting, I approached Franklin in the hallway. Why didn't you say anything? You know, this is exactly the kind of shortcut that leads to breaches. He looked uncomfortable. Jessica, I understand your concerns, but we need to be practical. The board is expecting this product to launch on schedule. Since when is security negotiable? I asked, unable to keep the disappointment from my voice. Franklin glanced around to ensure no one was listening. Things are different now. Just document your concerns so we're covered if anything happens, and find a way to work with Timothy on this. The next day, I noticed I had been removed from several email threads discussing security architecture for Asclepius. When I asked about it, Timothy claimed it was an administrative oversight and promised to add me back. He never did. In the weekly product meeting, I was surprised to hear Timothy present a secure authentication method I had designed months ago, as if it were his own innovation. When I mentioned this privately afterward, he laughed it off. No need to be territorial, Jessica. We're all on the same team. But it didn't feel like we were on the same team anymore. Gradually, I found myself excluded from client security briefings I had previously led. My recommendations were increasingly labeled as excessive or over-engineered. My team's security review periods were shortened from 5 days to 2, with the expectation that we would still sign off on new features. Rachel warned me one afternoon as we were running penetration tests. Jessica, your name came up in a meeting with the investors yesterday. A meeting you weren't invited to. What did they say? I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. I wasn't there either, but Amanda from legal told me they were discussing ways to streamline security processes that are impeding innovation. Rachel looked worried. That's code for sidelining you. Later that week, I overheard Timothy in the break room telling a new developer that excessive security protocols are killing our velocity and that changes were coming. He fell silent when he noticed me at the coffee machine. Despite the growing isolation, I continued to do my job meticulously. I stayed late documenting everything properly, knowing that thorough records might be our only protection when the shortcuts inevitably led to problems. I tried repeatedly to explain HSM key management protocols to Timothy's team, creating simplified diagrams and documentation, but my emails went unread or received cursory responses. During a product planning meeting, I noticed that all of my security recommendations had been moved to a section labeled Future Considerations. When I pointed this out, Timothy smiled thinly. We need to focus on core functionality first. We can add the security bells and whistles later. Proper key management isn't a bell or whistle, I objected. It's the foundation of the entire system. Several developers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but nobody backed me up. For the third time, a critical security update I had scheduled was postponed to make room for new feature development. When I emailed Margaret about the growing security debt we were accumulating, she replied with a single line, "Trust the process, Jessica." I spent an entire weekend composing a formal email to the executive team meticulously detailing the potential consequences of our current practices. I cited industry standards, referenced recent breaches at other companies that had taken similar shortcuts, and outlined specific vulnerabilities we needed to address immediately. I was professional but direct, making it clear that I was raising these issues out of concern for the company and our clients. The only response I received was from Samuel in HR, asking if I was experiencing any work-related stress and suggesting I might benefit from our employee assistance program. The following morning, I discovered that my project access had been unexpectedly restricted. I could no longer view certain security configuration files I had helped create. When I asked the system administrator about it, he looked uncomfortable and said the request had come from above. That afternoon, a calendar invitation appeared in my inbox. A 9 o'clock meeting the next morning with Samuel from HR. No agenda, no explanation. Just meeting. Jessica Davis and Samuel Peterson. My stomach dropped. After 8 years of dedicated service, I knew what was coming. I barely slept that night. I lay awake replaying every meeting, every email, every conversation of the past few months, wondering where I had gone wrong. Had I been too inflexible, too alarmist? Or had I simply become inconvenient to a company that no longer valued security the way it once had? By 5:30 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and got ready for work. I chose my outfit carefully, a charcoal gray suit that projected professionalism and confidence. If they were going to fire me, I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me look defeated. I arrived at the office at 7:15, 2 hours before my meeting with HR. The building was nearly empty, with only the cleaning staff and a few early birds present. I needed this time to back up important security documentation. Not to take anything proprietary, I would never compromise my professional ethics, but to ensure there was a record of the warnings I had given and the proper protocols I had established. My first clue that something was wrong came when my access badge failed at the main entrance. The light flashed red instead of green, and the door remained locked. I tried again, thinking it might be a glitch, but got the same result. I had to call the front desk and wait for Max, the security guard, to come let me in. "Morning, Jessica," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "System must be acting up again." But I could tell from his discomfort that it wasn't a system error. They had already deactivated my badge. The meeting was just a formality. Max escorted me to the elevator, his usually friendly demeanor replaced with an awkward silence. As we rode up to the 14th floor where my desk was located, he studied the elevator buttons intently. "Everything okay, Max?" I asked. "Yeah, sure," he replied too quickly. "Just, Monday morning and all." The office was starting to fill up as I walked to my desk. I noticed how colleagues suddenly became engrossed in their screens as I passed. A few gave me quick, sympathetic glances before looking away. Rachel wasn't at her desk yet. She usually came in around 8. I powered up my computer, relieved when my login still worked. I quickly began organizing my documentation, creating a detailed transition document explaining the HSM management protocols. Even if they were pushing me out, I felt a professional responsibility to ensure the security systems would be properly maintained. At 8:55, I saved my work and headed to the HR department on the 18th floor. Samuel was waiting outside his office along with Margaret. Neither smiled as I approached. "Jessica, please come in," Samuel said, gesturing to his office. The room was small and windowless, with bland, motivational posters on the walls. I sat in the chair across from Samuel's desk, while Margaret took a seat in the corner, her face impassive. Samuel cleared his throat. "Jessica, after careful consideration, CipherTech has decided to terminate your employment effective immediately." Even though I had anticipated it, the words still felt like a physical blow. "On what grounds?" I managed to ask, my voice steadier than I felt. "We're restructuring the security department," Margaret interjected. "The company is moving in a different direction that requires a more flexible approach to security implementation." "In other words, I'm being fired for doing my job," I said. Samuel frowned. "Your performance reviews have noted increasing rigidity and difficulty collaborating with other departments. You've been resistant to the company's evolving priorities." "I've been resistant to compromising security fundamentals," I corrected him, "which is what I was hired to do." "This decision is final," Margaret said coldly. "Samuel will walk you through the severance details." Samuel slid a folder across the desk. "Your severance package includes 8 weeks of pay and continuation of benefits for 30 days. In exchange, we require you to sign this confidentiality agreement and non-disparagement clause." I left the folder unopened. "I need to ensure a proper transition of the HSM management system. There are specific protocols that—" "That won't be necessary," Samuel interrupted. "We'll need your laptop keycard and any company devices now." His lips curled into a smirk as he added, "And the fob. Don't think we'd forget your little door opener." He was referring to the physical authentication token I used for HSM access, a small device attached to my keychain that generated one-time passwords. It was just one layer of the multi-factor authentication system I had designed. "You don't understand," I tried again. "The HSM system requires specific transition procedures. If you just cut off my access without proper—" "Our technical team has it handled," Margaret cut me off. "Franklin has assured us that they can manage the transition." "I need to speak with Franklin," I insisted. "There are key management procedures that only he and I fully understand." "Franklin is unavailable," Margaret said firmly. "Security will escort you out after you collect your personal belongings." The humiliation of being escorted through the office by security was almost unbearable. I kept my head high as I packed my family photos, my MIT diploma, and the small jade plant I had nurtured for years. Max stood awkwardly by my desk, clearly uncomfortable with his assignment. As I packed, I noticed my HSM monitoring dashboard was still active on my screen. The system showed green status indicators across all modules. At least they hadn't tried to transfer access yet. Maybe Franklin would ensure the proper protocols were followed. I saw Rachel entering the office as I was being led out. Her eyes widened in shock. She started toward me, but Amanda from legal stepped between us, murmuring something that made Rachel step back. All Rachel could do was mouth "I'll call you" as I was led to the elevator. My final glimpse of my desk included the HSM monitoring system still logged in and showing all systems normal. The small hardware security module seal indicator light glowed steady green on my desk, the physical manifestation of the digital fortress I had built and maintained for 8 years. The surreal feeling of being pushed out of a building I had helped secure was disorienting. Max looked relieved when he finally escorted me to the lobby. "I'm sorry about this, Jessica," he said quietly as we reached the main doors. "It doesn't seem right." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. In the parking garage, I sat in my car for several minutes, my hands shaking too much to insert the key in the ignition. 8 years of dedication ended in a 27-minute meeting. No chance to properly transition my responsibilities. No recognition of the systems I had built. Just the smirk on Samuel's face as he demanded my little door opener. The drive home was a blur of conflicting emotions. Disbelief that they would terminate the person responsible for their most critical security systems without a proper transition. Anger at Franklin for not standing up for me, or for proper security protocols. Fear about what might happen to the systems I had so carefully built and maintained. And beneath it all, a growing dread that I knew exactly what would happen next. I was still in my work clothes, sitting at my kitchen table in a daze when my phone started buzzing with notifications. At first I ignored them, assuming they were messages from colleagues who had witnessed my unceremonious departure. But when the buzzing continued persistently, I finally looked at my screen. A series of news alerts appeared, all variations on the same theme: CipherTech experiencing widespread technical difficulties. Major security firm reports system outages. Banks using CipherTech services report access issues. My heart raced as I opened my personal tablet and launched a monitoring app I had created. It wasn't connected to CipherTech's internal systems. That would have been unethical, but it did track publicly available status indicators for services we provided. The dashboard was lighting up with red alerts across multiple services. Then I saw it. A small notification timestamp, 9:01 a.m., just minutes after my termination meeting had concluded. Just about the time they would have tried to transfer my HSM access credentials. The specialized monitoring tool I had set up to track the HSM seal status from outside the network was showing that the connection had gone quiet at exactly 9:01. The HSM seal, a combination of physical and digital security measures that ensured the integrity of the hardware security module, had been broken. I knew immediately what had happened. They had attempted to transfer my administrative access without following the proper protocol. In any properly designed HSM system, unauthorized access attempts trigger an automatic lockdown to protect the cryptographic keys inside. It was a security feature I had personally implemented and had documented extensively. The implications were catastrophic. The HSM contained the root certificates for all of CipherTech's security infrastructure, the foundation upon which every client's data protection was built. If the HSM had locked down due to improper access attempts, those certificates were now inaccessible. Without them, encrypted connections would fail, authentication systems would reject valid credentials, and the entire security infrastructure would essentially collapse. I felt sick. Despite how they had treated me, I never wanted this to happen. Clients relied on CipherTech to protect their most sensitive data: patient records, financial transactions, personal information. Now all of that was at risk because the company had valued speed over security and had discarded the person who understood their systems best. My phone rang, Rachel calling. I answered immediately. "Jessica, it's a disaster here," she said. Her voice hushed and panicked. "Everything's down. The HSM went into lockdown mode and nobody knows how to reset it." "Did they try to transfer my access credentials without following the protocol?" I asked already, knowing the answer. "Timothy insisted they needed immediate access to your administrative account. He overrode Franklin's objections and had one of the junior admins do it." She paused. "They didn't use the secure transition procedure you created." "Of course they didn't," I said bitterly. "That procedure would have required my cooperation and would have taken 24 hours to complete properly." They're in full panic mode now. All client systems are going offline, and the executive team is locked in the conference room. Franklin looks like he's about to have a heart attack. She lowered her voice further. "I shouldn't be telling you this, but they're talking about millions in damages if they can't restore service quickly. Rachel, I need to go. Be careful, and don't let them make you the scapegoat for this. After hanging up, I turned to my computer and began monitoring security forums and social media. Reports were already appearing about issues with systems that used CipherTech's authentication services. A major bank had temporarily shut down its online banking platform. A healthcare provider was reporting inability to access patient records. The scope of the damage was expanding by the minute. I understood exactly what was happening in a way that perhaps only a handful of people in the company could. The HSM contained the master keys that protected all other keys in the system, the root of trust upon which everything else depended. When an unauthorized access attempt triggered the security protocols, the HSM had automatically sealed itself, locking away those critical keys. The system was designed this way intentionally. In security architecture, the worst-case scenario isn't someone stealing your keys. It's someone using your keys without authorization to compromise data. The HSM lockdown was a last-resort protection measure, ensuring that even if someone physically stole the device, they couldn't access the cryptographic material inside. But now, that same security feature was preventing legitimate access, and the only person who had designed the recovery protocol was sitting at home, having been escorted from the building less than 2 hours earlier. My phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. Hello. Jessica. It was Franklin, his voice strained. We need your help. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. There's been an incident with the HSM system, he continued, sounding desperate. The primary module went into lockdown after some access changes were attempted. You mean after you tried to transfer my credentials without following the security protocol I designed and documented? I said flatly. I heard him cover the phone and speak to someone in the room with him. His voice was muffled, but I clearly heard him say, "That was our root of trust." He came back on the line. Jessica, I know we've treated you terribly. I take full responsibility for not standing up for you and for the security standards you maintained. But right now we have clients losing access to critical systems. Healthcare providers can't access patient data. Financial transactions are failing. We need your help. I closed my eyes, conflicted. Part of me, a significant part, wanted to tell Franklin exactly where he could stick his request for help. They had dismissed my concerns, undermined my authority, and ultimately fired me for doing exactly what I was hired to do, protect their systems. But another part of me thought about the patients whose records were inaccessible, the people unable to access their bank accounts, the ripple effects spreading outward from CipherTech's failure. This wasn't just about my former employers getting what they deserved. Real people were being affected. If I help you, I said carefully, I have conditions. Anything, Franklin replied immediately. Just name them. First, everything gets documented. Every step of the recovery process, every person involved, every decision made. Agreed. Second, I want a formal acknowledgement that this incident was caused by failure to follow the security protocols I established. There was a brief pause. I'll have to check with legal on the exact wording, but yes, we can acknowledge that. Third, I'm not signing any new confidentiality agreements or releases. I'll help resolve this specific issue because I care about the clients affected, but I'm not giving up any rights. Understood, Franklin said quickly. Will you come in? I thought about the humiliation of being escorted out of Samuel's smirk as he demanded my little door opener, of 8 years of dedication ending with security walking me to the door. I'll be there in 30 minutes, I said. Have Max meet me at the main entrance. And Franklin, this doesn't make us even. As I hung up and grabbed my keys, I felt a strange mix of vindication and dread. I had been right about the importance of proper security protocols, but being right had never felt worse. The atmosphere at CipherTech was completely different when I returned. Max met me at the entrance as requested, but instead of the awkwardness of our earlier encounter, he seemed openly relieved to see me. Franklin himself was waiting in the lobby, pacing nervously, until he spotted me coming through the security checkpoint. Thank you for coming, he said, the bags under his eyes testifying to the stress of the past 2 hours. We've set up a crisis response room on the 16th floor. As we rode the elevator, Franklin attempted an apology. Jessica, I want you to know that I fought against your termination. I told them we needed you. But not hard enough, I replied evenly. Let's focus on fixing the immediate problem, We can discuss everything else later. The crisis room was actually the largest conference room, now transformed into what looked like a war room from a movie. Screens displayed system status dashboards, all dominated by red alert indicators. About 20 people were hunched over laptops, faces tense with concentration and fear. When I walked in, a hush fell over the room, followed by a collective exhalation of relief. Timothy was standing near the main display, his designer shirt rumpled and his face pale. He avoided my eyes as Franklin led me to the center of the room. "Jessica is here to help us resolve the HSM issue," Franklin announced. "She designed the system and knows the recovery protocols. Everyone give her whatever she needs." I set down my bag and surveyed the room. I need to know exactly what happened after I left, what actions were taken with the HSM system, and by whom. The room fell silent, people, exchanging uncomfortable glances. Finally, a junior system administrator named Andrew raised his hand hesitantly. "I was instructed to transfer your administrative access to Timothy immediately after your departure," he said, looking miserable. "I used the standard admin transfer procedure, but when I tried to apply it to your HSM credentials, the system rejected it. Timothy suggested we try a direct credential override and..." He trailed off. "And that triggered the security lockdown protocol I finished for him, exactly as the system was designed to do when it detects a potential unauthorized access attempt." I turned to the main screen, displaying the HSM status. When the HSM detected the invalid access pattern, it initiated a protective shutdown sequence. The root certificates and master keys are now in protected mode, which is why all dependent systems are failing. Client connections can't be authenticated without those certificates. Timothy stepped forward. "So we just need to restart the HSM, right? We tried power cycling it, but..." "Power cycling a security module during lockdown," I interrupted, unable to keep the incredulity from my voice. "That's exactly what you should never do. It triggers additional security measures." I addressed the room. The HSM has physical and logical security layers. Attempting to force access only makes the situation worse. There is a specific recovery protocol, but it requires multiple authentication factors and has mandatory time delays built in. "How long will it take?" Margaret asked from the doorway. I hadn't noticed her arrival. "If we start now and everything goes perfectly, about 12 hours, I replied. 12 hours, Timothy exploded. "That's unacceptable. Clients are already threatening to sue. We need these systems back online immediately." I met his gaze coolly. This system was designed to protect against exactly the kind of rushed improper access attempt that created this situation. The time delays are a security feature, not a bug. They prevent brute force attacks. Franklin intervened before Timothy could respond. "Jessica, please tell us what you need to begin the recovery process." "First, I need access to the physical HSM units. Then I'll need the backup authentication components, which should be in the secure storage room. Rachel, I'll need your help with the verification sequences." Rachel, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, nodded and stood up. "Everyone else, I need detailed logs of all actions taken since 9 a.m. today, especially any attempts to access the HSM or certificate stores." As people scrambled to fulfill my requests, Timothy approached me. "Look, Jessica, maybe we can find a workaround to speed this up. Some kind of backdoor or..." "There is no backdoor," I cut him off. "That's the entire point of a hardware security module. If there were an easy way to bypass security during lockdown, it would defeat the purpose of having it in the first place." For the next several hours, I worked methodically through the recovery protocol I had designed years earlier. It required physical access keys held by different authorized personnel, cryptographic key components stored in separate secure locations, and precise timing of authentication steps. Franklin followed my instructions without question, retrieving secure components and verifying sequences as needed. Rachel worked alongside me, her detailed knowledge of our systems proving invaluable as we navigated the complex recovery process. Around 2 p.m., Margaret called me into a side room where several executives had gathered. Their expressions ranged from anxious to hostile. "Jessica, we need to understand the full extent of the damage," she said. "What's our actual exposure here?" I didn't sugarcoat it. The HSM lockdown has compromised access to all services that rely on our root certificates. That's approximately 80% of client systems. Until we complete the recovery process, those systems will remain inaccessible. And could client data have been exposed? Asked Amanda from legal, her pen poised over a notepad. No, the data remains encrypted and secure. This is an availability issue, not a confidentiality breach. The system did exactly what it was supposed to do when it detected a potential unauthorized access attempt. It locked down to protect the keys. So this could have been prevented if proper protocols had been followed during the credential transfer, Amanda pressed. I met Margaret's eyes directly. Yes. I created and documented a secure credential transition process specifically for HSM administrative access. Had that process been followed, this would not have happened. Margaret looked away first. What do we tell our clients? The truth, I said firmly. That a security protocol was triggered during a system maintenance operation and you're working to restore service, and that no data has been compromised. We can't admit we caused this ourselves, Timothy objected. You don't have to detail exactly what happened, I replied, but you shouldn't lie either. Clients will be more understanding of a temporary outage than of being misled about its cause. I returned to the main crisis room and continued the painstaking recovery process. Throughout the afternoon and into the evening, I worked through each step of the protocol, carefully documenting everything for the inevitable post-mortem analysis. By midnight, we had successfully completed the first phase of recovery, restoring access to the HSM itself. The root certificates were still locked, but we could now begin the process of safely releasing them without compromising security. As we waited for a time-locked security delay to complete, Franklin brought me coffee and sat down heavily beside me. I should have listened to you, he said quietly, about everything. I was too tired for recriminations. Why didn't you? He stared into his coffee cup. Pressure. The investors, the board, Margaret. They were all pushing so hard for faster releases, more features. I told myself we could address the security concerns later, once we had secured our market position. Security doesn't work that way, I said. It has to be built in from the beginning, not bolted on afterward. I know, he admitted. I've always known that. I just forgot it somewhere along the way. By 6 a.m., after working through the night, we had restored the root certificates and begun the process of reactivating client systems. As services gradually came back online, the mood in the crisis room shifted from desperate to cautiously optimistic. Rachel brought me the latest status report. 70% of systems are back online and operational. The rest should be restored within the next 2 hours. I nodded, exhaustion making it hard to focus. I had been awake for nearly 24 hours, fueled by coffee and the grim determination to fix a problem I hadn't created. As morning light filtered through the windows, client calls began coming in, demanding explanations for the outage. I insisted on joining those calls, providing technical details and assurances that data security had not been compromised. I made it clear that the systems had functioned as designed to protect client information, even if the trigger had been an internal error. Margaret looked increasingly uncomfortable as she watched me handle these calls with a professionalism she had not expected. By the time the last system was restored around 9 a.m., she could barely meet my eyes. When the crisis was finally resolved, I gathered my things to leave. The same security guard who had escorted me out the day before now watched awkwardly as Franklin thanked me in front of the entire crisis team. "We owe you a debt of gratitude," he said. "You came back to help us, despite how we treated you." "I didn't do it for CipherTech," I replied loud enough for everyone to hear. "I did it for the clients and the people who depend on these systems." As I walked out of the building for the second time in 24 hours, I felt none of the humiliation of the previous day. This time, I left on my own terms with my professional integrity intact and my expertise undeniable. 3 days after the incident, I received an email from Franklin requesting a meeting with the board of directors. They wanted me to explain exactly what had happened and why. I agreed on the condition that the meeting be recorded and that I receive a copy of the recording. The boardroom was tense when I arrived. 8 people sat around a polished table, including Margaret, Franklin, and several investors I recognized from company events. Timothy was conspicuously absent. For the next 2 hours, I provided a detailed technical explanation of the HSM system, the security protocols I had established, and exactly how those protocols had been violated during the hasty attempt to transfer my access credentials. I explained the concept of root of trust in security architecture and why the HSM lockdown had cascaded into a system-wide outage. In security design, I concluded we planned for worst-case scenarios. The system responded exactly as it should have when it detected what appeared to be an unauthorized access attempt. The failure was not in the security protocol, but in the decision to ignore that protocol. One of the investors, an older man with steel-gray hair, leaned forward. In your professional opinion, could this have been prevented? Yes, I said without hesitation. I had created and documented a secure credential transition procedure specifically for situations where an HSM administrator leaves the company. Had that procedure been followed, this incident would not have occurred. The questions continued, becoming increasingly pointed as the board members digested the implications of what I was telling them. Why hadn't the procedure been followed? Who had authorized the credential override attempt? Had I raised concerns about security practices before my termination? I answered truthfully, providing dates, emails, and specific instances where my security recommendations had been dismissed or deferred. I had brought copies of key emails and documentation to support my statements. By the end of the meeting, the mood in the room had shifted from skepticism to something approaching contrition. The investor who had questioned me earlier asked for a private word as the others filed out. "We made a mistake," he said bluntly. "The board has been reviewing the events leading up to this incident, and it's clear that your concerns were valid and should have been addressed." I nodded, but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "Margaret and Timothy have been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation," he continued. "Franklin has recommended that we offer you the position of Chief Security Officer with expanded authority and direct reporting to the board. We're prepared to make it worth your while financially." The offer was what I might have dreamed of a week earlier: recognition, authority, and the chance to implement the security practices I had always advocated for. But something had fundamentally changed in how I viewed CipherTech and my place there. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I'll need some time to consider it." In the days that followed, news of the CipherTech security incident spread throughout the industry. Technology news sites reported on the major outage that had affected banking and healthcare clients. Without naming names or violating any confidentiality, they described a failure in credential management processes that had triggered security protocols. Major clients, including two of the largest banks that used CipherTech's services, suspended their contracts pending independent security audits. The company's reputation, built over years of reliable service, was now in question. Franklin called me almost daily, alternating between apologies for not supporting me and increasingly generous offers to return. Each time I told him I was still considering my options. The truth was, I was struggling to imagine returning to a company that had so thoroughly dismissed my expertise and professional judgment. Even with Margaret and Timothy gone, the culture that had allowed security to become secondary to speed would be difficult to change, and I wasn't sure I wanted to be the one to change it. Rachel continued to keep me informed about developments at CipherTech. "The atmosphere is completely different now," she told me over coffee. "Everyone's talking about security first, asking questions about protocols, double-checking procedures. Nothing like a catastrophic failure to focus the mind," I observed. "Are you going to take the CSO position?" she asked. I sighed. "I don't know. Part of me wants to go back and implement all the security measures I've been advocating for years. But another part wonders if the company will revert to old habits once the crisis has passed." "I'm thinking of leaving too," Rachel admitted. "A few of us from the security team have been talking about it. We don't want to work somewhere that doesn't value what we do until after a disaster." A week after the incident, I received a call from Elaine Martinez, the CEO of Sentinel Systems, one of CipherTech's main competitors. She had heard about the incident, and reading between the lines of the news reports had a good idea of what had happened. "We've always prioritized security over speed," she told me, "and we're looking for someone with your expertise to lead our cryptographic services division. No pressure, but I'd love to have a conversation if you're interested." Around the same time, I began receiving inquiries from former clients of CipherTech asking if I would be available for consulting work. They had lost confidence in their security provider and wanted independent verification of their systems. As these opportunities emerged, I spent a lot of time reflecting on what I truly wanted. The vindication of being proven right about security practices was hollow compared to the realization that I had been working in an environment that fundamentally didn't share my values. I met with a lawyer specializing in technology and employment law initially to review CipherTech's severance offer. Our conversation evolved into a discussion about consulting opportunities and how to structure an independent practice. Given your expertise in the current market situation, you could establish yourself as an independent security consultant focusing on proper HSM management, she suggested. Many companies struggle with this specific area, and recent events have highlighted its importance. The idea resonated with me. Instead of trying to change one company's culture from within, perhaps I could have a broader impact by helping multiple organizations implement proper security practices. 2 weeks after the incident, I declined CipherTech's offer to return as CSO. Franklin was disappointed, but not surprised. "I understand," he said. "We betrayed your trust, and that's not easily repaired." "It's not just about trust," I explained. "It's about values and priorities. I need to work somewhere that sees security as fundamental, not as an obstacle to speed." The following week, I filed the paperwork to establish my own consulting firm, Secure Foundation Consulting. My first client meeting was with a healthcare technology company that had been using CipherTech services and was now reevaluating their security infrastructure. In my presentation, I used the recent incident without naming CipherTech specifically as a case study in why proper security protocols are essential. The root of trust in any security system isn't just a technical component, I explained. It's a commitment to principles and processes that can't be compromised for convenience or speed. The company's CTO nodded in understanding. "That's exactly why we're talking to you instead of to the firm you used to work for," he said. "We need someone who understands that security isn't negotiable." As I drove home from that meeting, I checked the financial news on my phone at a stoplight. CipherTech's stock had dropped 30% since the incident, and analysts were questioning whether the company could recover client trust. I felt a complex mix of emotions. On one level, there was a certain justice in seeing a company that had disregarded proper security practices facing the consequences of that decision. But I also thought about the many dedicated employees at CipherTech who had nothing to do with those decisions. People like Rachel and the junior security analysts who had tried to do the right thing within a flawed system. Later that week, Rachel called to tell me she had resigned from CipherTech, along with 2 other members of the security team. "We're all updating our resumes," she said. "Any chance your new consulting firm might need some experienced security analysts?" For the first time in weeks, I found myself smiling with genuine optimism about the future. Perhaps something good could come from this situation after all. 6 months after the CipherTech incident, my consulting practice had grown from a one-woman operation to a team of 7 security specialists. We had moved from my home office to a small but modern space in a downtown office building, where our conference room featured a wall of security certifications and a small framed news article about a major security failure at an unnamed tech firm that had served as the catalyst for our founding. The incident that had seemed like the end of my career had actually been the beginning of something better. Secure Foundation Consulting specialized in cryptographic infrastructure and HSM management, the very expertise that CipherTech had dismissed. We now counted 3 major banks, several healthcare technology providers, and even a government agency among our clients. My new office reflected my personal philosophy, clean, organized with security-themed art, and a small jade plant rescued from my desk at CipherTech. The plant had nearly died during the crisis period, but had recovered with proper care, a metaphor I appreciated more than I cared to admit. Rachel had joined me as my first employee, bringing her meticulous attention to detail and programming expertise. We had established a firm culture that prioritized thorough work over rushed deadlines, quality over speed, and had turned down clients who pushed for shortcuts. "Jessica, your 2 o'clock is here," Rachel announced, poking her head into my office one Tuesday afternoon. I looked up from my computer where I was reviewing a client's HSM configuration. "Thanks, Rachel. How are those security audit reports coming along?" "Just finished the executive summary," she replied with a smile. "Much easier to get things done when you're not fighting your own company about the importance of security." CipherTech had continued to struggle in the wake of the incident. According to industry news, they had lost over 30% of their clients, and their stock had never recovered to pre-incident levels. An independent audit had confirmed what I had been saying for months before my termination. Their security practices had become dangerously compromised in the pursuit of faster releases and market share. Margaret and Timothy had both been fired after the audit results. Franklin had stepped down as CTO to a reduced role, focusing on technical development rather than management. The company had hired a new executive team that publicly committed to rebuilding their security infrastructure and practices from the ground up. I occasionally received emails from former colleagues still at CipherTech describing the painful process of rebuilding client trust and implementing the very security measures I had advocated for. There was no satisfaction in their struggles, only confirmation that security fundamentals couldn't be treated as optional extras. My professional reputation had been transformed by the incident. What could have been a career-ending termination had instead established me as someone who stood by security principles, even when it was professionally costly. I had been invited to keynote a major security conference on maintaining the root of trust in critical systems, where I shared lessons learned without ever naming my former employer. The personal growth had been even more significant than the professional transformation. Being fired after 8 years of dedication had forced me to confront questions about my own worth and identity. I had learned that my value wasn't determined by one company's flawed judgment, and that standing by my principles, even when it cost me, was essential to my sense of self. My new role as the founder of a security consulting practice gave me more control over my work-life balance. I no longer stayed until 9 p.m. trying to convince skeptical executives about security necessities. Instead, I worked with clients who valued our expertise and were committed to implementing proper security practices. Most gratifying was the opportunity to mentor young security professionals, instilling in them the ethical framework that had guided my own career. Security isn't just about technical knowledge, I told our new hires. It's about integrity and the courage to stand firm when pressured to compromise. We had developed new HSM management protocols that were being adopted by major financial institutions, protocols that built on what I had created at CipherTech, but with additional safeguards learned from the incident. There was poetic justice in seeing my approach to security, once dismissed as excessive and over-engineered, now being embraced as industry best practice. One afternoon I was having coffee with Rachel when she asked a question that made me reflect deeply. "Do you ever regret how things ended at CipherTech?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. I regret that it took a catastrophic failure to prove what I had been saying all along. I regret the impact on clients and on colleagues who had nothing to do with the bad decisions. But I don't regret standing my ground on proper security practices. "It's funny," Rachel observed. "They fired you for doing exactly what they hired you to do, protect their systems." "The irony isn't lost on me," I agreed. "But I've realized something important through all this. The root of trust in security systems isn't so different from the root of trust in professional relationships. Both require consistent principles, transparency, and respect for fundamental truths that can't be compromised for convenience." The incident had changed how I approached both technical systems and human relationships. I was more direct about my boundaries and expectations. I valued transparency and integrity above pleasantries and politics, and I had become much better at recognizing environments where my expertise would be respected rather than resented. In my new role, I had the opportunity to build a company culture that aligned with these values. We celebrated thoroughness rather than speed. We documented everything meticulously. We turned down work from clients who pushed for shortcuts or treated security as an afterthought. The financial rewards had followed naturally from this approach. As data breaches and security failures made headlines with increasing frequency, our reputation for uncompromising security practices attracted clients willing to pay premium rates for peace of mind. But the true reward was more fundamental: the knowledge that I was building something valuable on a solid foundation, both technically and ethically. The painful experience of being fired for doing the right thing had ultimately led me to a place where doing the right thing was celebrated rather than penalized. As our firm grew, I often reflected on how the worst professional experience of my life had become the catalyst for the best. The very expertise that CipherTech had dismissed was now the cornerstone of a thriving practice. The principles they had sacrificed for speed were now our competitive advantage. The root of trust in any system, technical or human, requires proper foundations, consistent principles, and the courage to maintain those principles even when it's difficult. My career had become a testament to that truth in ways I never could have anticipated when I was escorted from CipherTech's offices 6 months earlier. Have you ever stood your ground on something important, even when it cost you in the short term? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if this tale of corporate betrayal and professional vindication resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about navigating the complex world of technology and workplace dynamics. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that sometimes being right is its own reward, even when it comes with a painful price tag. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, in security and in life, the strongest foundations are built on unwavering principles.